Today is the 30th day of Av, first day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, and what is it in September? The 2nd? I think the 2nd, right? Third of September. Okay. And we're starting chapter 18 in Shorish Mitzvahs Tefillah, in Derech Mitzvosecha from the Tzemach Tzedek. And we're now going to go into a series of chapters. When I was looking over the whole construct here, deciding whether to go over it or not, to review it here, so I looked at the structure again. And so from our chapter 18, he's going to start a whole series of chapter, I think, that end they end somewhere at the end of the 20s. So it's like about 10, 11 chapters. He's going to be speaking about why there is diversity in nature. And what he means by diversity is not that there is a chipmunk and a snail. What he means is that how could there even be anything but one? Meaning multiplicity. Hashem is one. So how do we suddenly get out of that this multiplicity that we see? And it's very diverse also. So what exactly happens? This was the big problem that led the Greeks to dissolve the connection between creator and creation. In other words, the Greeks didn't see God as creator, they saw God as animator. He's the one who gives life to reality, but he doesn't create reality. Reality was seen as diametrically inconsistent with the notion of a single creator. They had the notion of one, but for them the one was the animator, the one who gives all the life force. He's the source of all the life force. They couldn't understand how is it possible logically that from one thing could come many different things. So they had to divorce the two ideas.
They had creation myths.
Yeah, they did. But all the creation myths don't start with one. They always have multiple deities.
Really? Yeah, correct.
Always.
I see what you're saying.
All the creation myths everywhere in the world basically start with but the Greeks, more than any, they were very upset about this inconsistency. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. So they ended up saying that there is no creator in the creation sense. There's an animator, someone who's giving life. What they call him, the prime mover or whatever. But he's only giving life force. And Yiddishkeit is adamant that it all starts from God. That God is the creator and he's also the animator. So you have to explain, how do you get from one to many? That's the big issue. And so there were different answers we have to understand, Judaism starts from tradition. It doesn't start from a rational approach. It won't contradict rationality, but it doesn't start from it. In other words, it's up to you afterwards to figure out how this tradition fits with your rational mind. And so that's what he's going to dedicate about 10 chapters to explain where this multiplicity, this diverse multiplicity comes from. How is it possible? But to get into that, we first have to understand the concept of oneness. Okay? And there's many, many discussions of this. In Chassidus, this is one of the places, it's not the most complete, but it's one of the places where this is discussed. So we're going to go straight into this. His premise is going to be that I want to explain in more depth the particular words used in the Shema. But obviously the most important word in the Shema is echad, one. So how do we get from that oneness into reality where there's so much multiplicity? Okay, so let's start. Chapter 18. So he's starting a new topic. He says we need to understand the words, the particular words of a number of words in Kriyas Shema and in the davening in the Shemona Esrei. ובפרט ההתבוננות בפסוק ראשון בקריאת שמע. And especially the first verse of Kriyas Shema. So, like we said, until now, at the end of chapter 17, we have the framework of how prayer works, of what prayer is supposed to do. What are we doing? Again, and this is not in the prayer that a person now needs a parking spot, that he just turns to God and he speaks however he speaks. We're talking about the prayer that is 3 times a day, that is well textually well defined. This is what you say, this is when you say it, this is when you stand up, this is when you sit down. What is this structure about? So we've finished, we understand, hopefully now, after these 17 chapters, what that is all about. Now he wants to get into particular areas of the prayer, and specifically the first verse of Shema. Hinei Shema Yisrael li rosh. So Israel, one of the meanings of the word Israel is I have a head. Because if you take the letters of Israel and you permute them, you get the 2 words li rosh. I have a head. What does it mean? שהקדוש ברוך הוא אומר על נשמות ישראל שהם כביכול לי ראש. So it's an amazing explanation that appears in the Zohar, that it's God saying, I have a head. Meaning it's not we saying we have a head. It's God saying, I have a head. Who is my head? He's saying this about the souls of Israel, that they're my head. כי הנה הראש כולל מוחין והגולגולת, והגולגולת בחינת רצון, והמוח הוא הטעם הכמוס בתוך הרצון, ולהיות כי תכלית הבריאה בשביל ישראל, כמאמר רז"ל, במי נמלך מנשמותיהם של צדיקים, אם כן הרי הן שעלו ברצונו יתברך, ובשבילן נברא העולם. ואם כן הם בחינת לירוש שנמשכים בחינת רצון העליון. So what does he mean by saying that? He says, in reality I have in Israel, it means I have a head. What is the head all about? The head is all about my will. That my will is being fulfilled in reality. Because inside the head you have a skull. The skull in Kabbalah represents, Gulgalta represents the will, especially what's inside the skull, but the skull itself already, it represents will. It's the partsuf of Arich Anpin, the lower half of the crown. And you can even argue that when you put a crown on someone's head, what you're doing is you're representing their skull. Meaning you're giving like another extension so that you can see that he has a skull, which really comes to say, the symbolism is I have will. I have agency. I have authority. I have the ability to do what I want. That's what the crown is supposed to symbolize. So God, by creating the Jewish people, this word Israel means I have a head. In other words, here is my will embodied. This is my will. This is what I wanted. And how does he say this? It goes both ways. He says, on the one hand, this is my will embodied in the sense that this is what my purpose of creation was, to have someone serve me out of their own choice. And that's what Israel accepted. They accepted the covenant with me. They foregoed their self-interest in order to serve me. They accepted this yoke as a people. So they represent my will being embodied. But he also adds here that they represent my will itself. In other words, what does he mean here? He's saying, before God created the world, the sages learned this from a verse in the 8th chapter of 1 Chronicles, Ima melech bimsibo, something like that, I don't remember the verse exactly, that God, as it were, needed to consult with someone whether to create the world or not. And so he consulted with the souls of the tzaddikim. He consulted with the souls of the righteous. And they said, yes, go, you should create the world. Why did he need to consult? Because he needed a partner in a certain sense. Otherwise, if he doesn't have a partner with him, then there's no telling where the world is going to go. The tzaddikim are like the borders set into the world to make sure that the world keeps going in the right direction. And this has many, many ramifications. I don't want to get into the negative ones. The negative ones are that from time to time they have to give their lives up for this. They sacrifice themselves. Why? Because these acts of sacrifice for God, they keep the world on track. Because the nations then see that there's something serious here. There's something serious about this covenant that they have with God. But let's talk about the good part. The good part is, the positive part is that tzaddikim constantly remind us and the world that our purpose in life is to serve God. They show a living example of what this is. They cause people to want to imitate them. They cause people to want to be like them because they see how good these people are. And so on the positive front, what they're doing constantly is they're bringing the world to accept God's will. So it's both ways. They both represent the culmination of God's will, but they're also partners with God in making that will happen in the world. Okay? They are what he calls I have a head. Because their root, like where their souls come from, is from this inner will that is called the hidden reason behind the will. Very important, this phrase, tam kamus baratzon. In general, will, there's two types of will. We've talked about this in the past. The Zohar says it ratzon ve'it ratzon. There's one will and there's another will. What's the difference between them? Explain that there's will that is not really will. Rather, a person sees that his friend has something, and he covets it, he wants it, whatever, he decides to buy one also. So his mind tells him, I want this. It's not really his will. He's sort of been implanted from somewhere. That's what advertisement and marketing is all about. How do I get you to want what I want you to want? Okay, so that's not will really. It's called will by people. He wanted this, he fancied this, he whatever. But it's not real will because it doesn't come from the person himself, it's implanted from the outside. The real will is one that has no reason. You can't trace the cause. Like a person says, I want vanilla ice cream and not chocolate ice cream. So if you can trace it back to advertisement, that's one thing. But usually when it comes to taste, you can't trace it back to advertisement. Nobody can give you taste. Taste is something chemical internal to yourself. So it has no cause. There's no cause. It's not because your mother did this or that when you were pregnant. We don't know why. That is considered to be true will. Now that's lower true will. Nobody cares about what flavor of ice cream you like. But the person says, I want to marry this woman and not this woman. Or she says, I want to marry this man and not that man. Those are more internal already. Those are more essential will. So will, by definition, we say, doesn't have a cause, doesn't have a reason behind it. There's no ta'am. Ta'am in Hebrew means a reason or a cause. However, there is something called the hidden reason behind will. Chassidus acknowledges that though normally you can't figure out what is causing a person to want the most essential things in their life, there is a cause behind it. What's the cause? So the cause in this case is that God wanted it to be so. In other words, why does the tzaddik want to live the type of life that he wants? Because li rosh, because I have a head, says Hashem, I have a will. He basically, like we said, he's partnering with God. He's imbuing himself, he's taking upon himself the will of God. He's become like God's will embodied in this sense. So that's why the sages have this statement in the brachos, I believe. It says that when the Jewish people respond, Amen Yehei Shmira B'Mvorach, when they say, maybe it's not in brachos, can't be actually, maybe it is. In any case, when they answer in the Kaddish, Amen, may the great name of Hashem be blessed. God, as it were, they say, he like nods his head. God doesn't have a head, he doesn't nod his head. What are we talking about? So you say, what he's saying is, שעל ידי אמן יש מרב ומברך הם גורמים גילוי והמשכת רצון העליון עם פנימיות החוכמה העילה. So they cause Hashem to reveal his will. Meaning, when we bless him, he says, oh, I have a good vessel for my will. I have someone here who can carry my will. וזהו עניין הנענוע בראשו כביכול. And that's what it means that he's nodding. He's not nodding in the sense of, oh, I'm so happy that someone accepts me and blesses me. He says, no, I'm nodding because, as it were, I'm lowering my will into them. ולהיות כן שישראל הם עם קרובו ממש, הם כביכול לירוש, על כן אומר עליהם שמע, והתבונן בזה. So therefore, the Shema Yisrael means listen, meaning contemplate, understand that you are Israel. Understand that you are the vessel for my will. That's how you have to see it. That's what Shema Yisrael means. That's what it's telling you to meditate, to think about. Because it's all dependent on you whether the infinite will be revealed in the world or not. Meaning the infinite being through God's will. There has to be a will that brings it down. And what that means is really the recognition that there is nothing but God. There's nothing else here but God. And therefore, this is what comes down when you say Shema Yisrael. Again, to contemplate this, that just by saying this, you are now the vessel for God's will. That's what it means to be Israel. That's what it means, okay? So that's the first thing he's a small little piece here. Okay, this stands alone by itself. What is the meaning of the words Shema Yisrael? What does it mean? That hear, O Israel. Hear that you are Israel. Meaning, in other words, recognize that you have the potential to carry God's will in this world. Okay, so we'll end here. And tomorrow he'll start looking at another small piece. And from there he'll get into this thing of multiplicity.